Footage of the First World War has generally been presented in grainy black and white. We have this image, don't we? But now, thanks to some fantastic technology, we can get a much more colourful insight into that period of history that will forever be etched on the minds of the nation. Here to tell us why it's so, and why it's so important to pay our respects to these past events, is our resident historian, Kate Williams, and the founders of the World War I Veterans Association, Dennis and Brenda Goodwin. Nice to meet you. Dennis, don't get up. Lovely to see you. Thank you for coming, Dennis and Brenda. And we are, of course, Kate, celebrating, because it is exactly a century since, well, commemorating exactly 100 years since the First World War broke out. These pictures are astonishing, aren't they? We've always thought of World War I as being fought in black and white.
Yes, it's astonishing to see it in colour, and it was so interesting. You were just talking about teenagers. Do you remember how many of those 65 million men who went to war were teenagers, 13, 14, people who are, you know, thinking about tech speak now, were actually out there fighting in the trenches. Unbelievable to think of the sacrifice they went through.
Brenda, tell us about your association, why it was formed and when it was formed.
Well, Dennis started it 28 years ago. He was very associated with veterans from the First World War. Dennis was born in a fire station where all the firemen were First World War veterans. And then Dennis's son rang up and said he was thinking of taking 7 veterans back to Flanders. Would he help? So Dennis said yes.
You did. How many were there back then, Dennis? You started 28 years ago. How many veterans were there around then?
Approximately 500.
Yeah.
Still alive.
And now, of course, we've lost them all, the last ones.
Yeah. That's quite right, yes.
Their stories must have been amazing.
They are, and they're still plentiful.
Yeah.
And I still can remember quite a number of stories.
What was the main effect of connecting them all together? You know, you were taking about... They weren't... sort of never been together as a group, they were all individuals. What was the main effect?
The first 14 did know one another when they went over to France for the first time. They came back, really, their chests were bit heaving. There was one man who never uttered a word for about 6 or 7 months, we were told. And right at the end, when we had a sing-song, he joined in, much to the astonishment of his daughter.
Yeah. What a wonderful
And
story.
when I came back from there, the telephone never stopped ringing. People kept ringing up and said, can you take my father, my husband, my uncle? They'd want to go back.
It grew and grew and grew.
And it grew, and it grew, and it grew. And on the 75th anniversary of the Somme, we took 43 veterans to commemorate it.
Yeah, you know, you didn't lose one.
Nope.
Well,
we didn't.
So you've seen this footage, your favourite. We've got a bit of footage for each of you that you've chosen.
Yes.
So, Brenda, your piece of footage.
Well, Henry Allingham, who was the oldest man in the world, of course, when he practically lived with us. He died at 113. He was in the Royal Naval Air Service.
113, isn't amazing?
He described the precariousness of flying then. They had no radios, they used pigeons, and if they came down, they sent the pigeon back. If they had to watch their fuel, they had to drop the bronze over the side. I mean, it was very, very precarious.
And there were bits of string and paper that these planes were made of. It was an amazing dogfight we're looking at. Quite astonishing. And hugely precarious.
Incredible. He used to go up with them when he could. Then he would come back. And the pilots had to get out of the planes very quickly, as they were likely to burn.
Yeah.
And he said he saw many pilots lose their lives like that.
Yeah.
That's very clear in the colour of the film now.
Yeah. And the piece you've chosen for us, Dennis, your piece of film,
was the eagerness of the young men to take up arms.
Yeah.
They came from all sides of the society.
Yeah.
And I think by 3 months' time, they got his 100,000, a million men.
It's astonishing, isn't it?
Under, yes.
And you were saying all very young, Kate.
Incredibly young. So, of course, they were supposed to be 18, but so many lied about their ages, they got away with it. And simply, you know, it's amazing when you read the accounts, because we know that the upper age of conscription was 40, 41, but people talk about 30-year-olds as if they're too old. You've got these young soldiers saying, oh, these old men, they get stuck in the mud. And they're 30, 32. So it was a really terrifying young man's game. And this huge death toll that I don't think anyone of course, people really did think it was going to be over by Christmas. They signed up in this flush of patriotism. They really did think it was going to be a short, sharp shock and over.
And this came out, Brenda, presumably, when you were talking to them, didn't
Yes,
it?
well, many of them, of course, they only knew their little bit. But when the veterans got together and they started comparing their own experiences, of course, then they created a great bond between them. And they used to argue about who did what, and the shells weren't right, and you didn't go in the trenches. Oh, no, I know all about it.
Yeah.
But they were wonderful. They sang, and they had lots of fun.
Now that they've all gone, alas,
Yes.
no longer with us, is your organisation still going in some way?
Yes, we still have a charity, which Stephen runs, and it's the Henry Allingham Award for schools. We used to take a lot of the veterans into schools to talk to the children, and the children used to write their own questions, and then Henry or many of the others would answer them. But there's now an award for any of the schools that do a very good project on the First World War, and they get a little award.
And you got your veterans into some amazing places, Dennis, together.
All we did, we tried to find out the real
Their sort of dream wishes.
that's right.
Yeah.
Dream
Buckingham
wishes,
Palace
yes,
and
yes,
Tea
the
with the
garden
Queen.
parties,
yes, yes.
tea on the...
And you did get tea with the Queen, didn't you, for one of
You
them?
got tea with the Queen as well? Wonderful. Well, and so you should. A couple of little things that came out of the First World War that people often forget.
Well, we think of the destruction, but there were many things that it did that changed our lives in a good way. For example, blood transfusion. It simply hadn't really been necessary before. But in a state where you are in the trenches, when you need immediate blood transfusion, so it was created, and the first blood bank was set up in 1917, and blood was actually kept on ice. So it revolutionised modern medicine. That was created. We've also got plastic surgery was completely accelerated by the terrible wounds people had suffered. They actually reconstructed faces. And daylight saving, of course, was changed. The timings were changed to give us more time to cut down on low amounts of coal. One of my favourites is also licensing, because Lord George, great Lord George, was quite obsessed with the fact that drink was what undermined the actual efforts of the British people. So we actually, in the beginning of World War I, pubs are open from 5 in the morning till midnight, and he said they had to close in the afternoon. And also, they brought in a law in Britain that if I was to go to the pub now with Dennis in 1917 and try and buy him a drink, I might be arrested, he might be arrested, and so would the barmaid, because it was illegal to buy anyone a drink.
Dennis, don't think
war.
about it. Great story. It's an incredibly important part of our history, brought to life for a whole new generation. World War I in colour. It's out now on DVD. My thanks to Kate Williams and to two people who did sterling work for the World War I veterans, Brenda and Dennis Goodwin. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.